Let's start. The question that we have today is from Alyssa Deweese, who has told me that she is joining us. So everyone can say hi to Alyssa if you want. And she messaged me about Proverbs chapter 30, and we had done that when we first started this back in March, when we thought that this might not be really long, but then we all realized this is going to take forever. Uh, um, were reading through a proverb a day on the live, and I'm sure that had popped and sparked that question. If not, it's just a really good proverb. So, in Proverbs chapter 30, so if you guys want to go there, I'm just going to kind of walk through and look at and just make some observations from the chapter. And it's a very good chapter. It's one of the ones that's not written by Solomon, which makes it unique in and of itself. Solomon wrote the bulk of the story, or the book of Proverbs. So if there's one that's not by Solomon, it's kind of unique. And this one is by a guy named Agur or Agur. I don't know. I like it either way. So that's his. This is his proverb that he writes. He writes 30 and 31. And so let's. I don't have my Bible with me. I'll give you kind of the breakdown of the chapter, and then we'll do a little bit of reading on it here. So Proverbs chapter 30. These are the words of Agur, and I'll just read a couple verses and then we'll talk about them. The man declares, "I am weary, O Lord. I am weary, O God, and worn out. Surely I am too stupid to be a man." There you go. There's a nice way to talk about yourself. "I have not the understanding of a man. I have not learned wisdom, nor I have knowledge of the Holy One." We see here that the proverb writer Agur here starts off with the humble reality of man. So he starts off with just acknowledging who he is, and he starts off by acknowledging who he is in light of God, in comparison to the Heavenly Father, not in comparison to other people, because he's clearly writing a chapter in the book of the Bible, so he's probably a pretty cool guy. But in relationship to God, he sees himself as this very humble state. And then he goes into the other side of that comparison. So here's what he is in light of God, and here is who God is. He says, "Who has ascended to heaven and come down? Who has gathered the wind in his fists? Who has wrapped up the waters in a garment? Who has established all the ends of the earth? What is his name? What is his son's name? Surely you know." And we see that this language should draw you to think about God the Father and God the Son, who has ascended into heaven and come down. This is, we know Jesus was in heaven and then has come down. See that God is the one who has gathered up the wind in his fists, and he has the one who's created the water. He has established all the ends of the earth. So he's referring from, he's showing the humble nature of himself, and then the greatness of God, and God the Father and God the Son. It says, "What is his name? Surely you know, and what is his son's name?" And so it's interesting that he's writing back here that it's almost like there's a little bit, and you'll see as you read through Psalms and Proverbs and stuff, there's prophecy that's kind of sprinkled in there that's going to talk about something in the future, and this is one of those times. Now we see after that, then he adds more to what is about God. "Every word of God proves true. He is a shield to those who take refuge in him." And then he contrasts that here in a little bit. We're going to see with the sin of people, but he's then in the middle of this going to make there's almost like there's a little prayer in the middle of this, and he says this. "Two things I ask of you, deny them not to me before I die. Remove far from me falsehood and lying. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that is needful for me. Lest I be full and deny you and say, 'Who is the Lord?' Or lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of my God." I love how he writes this here. These are his true requests. That he, like Solomon, has these amazing requests of God. He says, if I could ask anything of God, here's what it would be. And I remember when I was a kid, and when I saw the story of Solomon, and then and this stuff as well, I was like, man, if I could ask anything of God, I would ask for like a really cool snake, or like some money, or some food. And we see that Agur here is asking, I really, God, would just prefer that if you would make me and help me to not be a liar. Remove from me all falsehood. Let me not believe false things. Let me not say false things. Let me trust in the truth and rest in the truth of God and in Him alone. And that's really an amazing statement. Let it be said of Him that He is not a liar, that He tells the truth, that He is one who is a man of the truth. And then He says, give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that is needful for me, lest I be full and deny you, or I be poor and steal. And I love that. He said, don't make me rich. Don't make me super poor. Just sustain me with what I need. Don't give me any more than I need. Don't give me any less than I need. Because I know if I have more than I need, I'll deny that I need you. And if I know that I have less than I need, I might steal and profane your name. So that's quite the contrast to what a lot of us would say. If we could pray for God in our monetary sense, we'd probably ask for more, right? We would want more money. Who doesn't want more money? But Agur here makes a statement of wisdom that just says, I don't want more because more will lead me to sin. And Lord, help me to not be overtly poor, because then I might be tempted to steal and profane your name. Just sustain me with what I need, because what he knows he needs is just God. He knows he needs God and God to sustain him. He says, it basically is just asking, keep me dependent. Keep me dependent on you, Lord. I don't want to become independent. I don't want to be independent because I have too much. I don't want to be independent because I have too little. Give me just enough to stay dependent on you. And we see from here, then he makes the contrast again between the truth of God and then what is going to be said of people here. So the structure of Proverbs are usually different. They vary. A lot of times it's just a bunch of wisdom statements. So you'll see verses that don't necessarily tie to one another. And that's a little bit different from books of the Bible, like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and Romans, and, and all these other places where usually if there's a grouping of verses, they're all kind of moving in the same way. Proverbs is very different. Usually if there is a structure, it'll be, kind of like what we have here, where he acknowledges, his humility. He acknowledges the greatness of God. Then you see him again talking about what he would need. Then he talks about the greatness of God. Then he goes into the sinfulness of humanity. And so there's some repetition and pattern, but it's not like what we see in the rest of the Bible, where it's like clearly all these verses are talking about the same thing. It's not really how Proverbs works. It's wisdom literature. And so it's a lot of statements. Kind of like how the book of Psalms, Psalm 96 and Psalm 95 might relate to one another, but they're songs, and so they might, but they might not, and that doesn't take away anything from their validity. But the Bible has different structures written in it, and we have to be mindful of those when we read. So we see that we look at the greatness of God, and then now we're going to look at the sinfulness of humanity. And then as Agur's looking at the sinfulness of humanity, he's going to kind of go on a rabbit trail a little bit, and we should all like that, because we all do rabbit trails all the time. So we're going to see him kind of go on a rabbit trail, and we're going to follow his rabbit trail here. So the sins of humanity, and he lists off the sins that the people are plagued with. So they have these sins, and I'll summarize those couple verses with this. So the first one, they curse their parents, and that's not like doing some form of witchcraft ceremony, but a cursing of their parents would be how they talk about their parents. So a cursing of them, maybe a cursing at them, but they curse them. And then they speak poorly of them. They rip them behind their backs, or they tear them down. So they curse them. They're not mindful of their parents. They don't seek to take care of their parents, which you would think, like, if we're going to talk about the ugliest of humanity's sins, why are we going right to disobey mom and dad? But that shows you how serious that command is, mainly because you're being taught how to obey and trust authority with your mom and dad, because ultimately they're trying to teach you the posture of being trusting and obedient to God's authority. And so that there's a reason for that. It's not just because your mom and dad are killjoys. They are building into you the idea of trusting and obeying authority, so that when they introduce you to God and how you need to trust and obey in his authority, you're already ready to do that. That's why it's important to do that. It's not just a command for toddlers. It's a command for all of us. It says here that they think they're clean. They assume themselves to be righteous, but they are not. And this is really one of the greatest sins of humanity. We can see it all the time. People regularly proclaim themselves to be these great people when they're not. They claim to be this, but they're not. We can see this most profoundly in the Bible, in the Pharisees, and in the Jewish people, and other people like that. Here it says their eyes are lofty. Now that doesn't mean that they have eyes that are higher on their head or that are up, but their eyes are lofty. They're often kind of like stuck up, looking into the clouds, like they're better than everyone else. They don't have time to look down on the poor and needy. They think more of themselves than they ought to. Basically, they're cocky. We know that humanity is a very prideful group of people, and then they take advantage of and abuse the poor. It says their fangs there are like knives; they're sharp, and they seek to abuse the poor. So that instead of lifting them up and out of their poverty, they seek to manipulate them for their own purposes. And this, again, we can see this true in our day regularly. So the sins of humanity, and then he's going to go on this rabbit trail as he looks at the sins of humanity and how they just can't seem to stop. Then his mind goes to the beginning of a bunch of statements where he's going to say, three things are this, four cannot be that. And there's a bunch of those in a row. So there's three things that can be this, but four that cannot be satisfied. Three things that are this, but four that are beyond my understanding. Three things that are this, but four the earth cannot stand under. You're going to see this regular pattern. And so if you ever see something that's that clearly of a pattern in scripture, you're going to want to know why that's being used. It's probably important. So much like the sins of humanity cannot be satisfied, that they're just constantly running after these sins, that brings his mind to, three things that can never be satisfied, four things, and it talks about, the barren womb, wildfire, a dry and weary land. These things are used by the writer of the Proverbs. They take normal, everyday, circumstantial things and pull wisdom principles out of them. So they would look at a wildfire and see not just like, ooh, pretty fire, or, oh, that's dangerous, that's tearing things up. But they would look at that and they think that is something that cannot be satisfied, much like sinful humanity's pursuits of their own desires. It seems as if humanity cannot get enough of the very things that the Bible would call sin. And we know that to be true. We can see that in our world all around us, by the entertainment, by the music, by everything that we have. People seem to just not be able to get enough of sin. And so we know this to be true. It says there's three things that are this before that are on comprehension. They're too wonderful for me. I cannot understand them. These things serve as a reminder to the one who's pursuing wisdom that there are things that cannot be fully understood and just need to be appreciated. And this is hard for us, especially as people who can Google anything we want and we get the answer. If we don't get an answer we like, it's usually hard for us to be okay with just being okay. But there are things in this world that are too great for our understanding. And that's something that's always important to keep in mind when we're talking about God. God is never going to be fully understood by us. We're never going to know all the things that he does or why he does them, because he's God and we're not. And so it's the reminder to the one who's pursuing wisdom that cold, hard logic doesn't always make it in this world. There are some things that you are just going to have to sit back and say, that's awesome. I don't understand it. I can't fully comprehend it, but man, is that cool. And that's how I feel when anyone does anything artistic. I have no artistic abilities whatsoever. My greatest drawings are stick figures, and even those you might be more prone to believe Levi drew them than I did. I'm just not gifted in that way. So when I see like a beautiful painting or a sculpture, I look at that and I just think, I'm not going to try to comprehend how you can do that. I'm just going to sit back and say, that's awesome. When Lindsay does puzzles, she did like a 1,000-piece puzzle the other day. That's, she was doing that. She didn't do it in one day, but over a period of time, she did a puzzle. I look at that and I don't want to know how or why anyone would do that. I just sit back and say, that's awesome. I can appreciate that from a long distance away. I despise puzzles. They don't make sense to me. I don't like doing them. They take too long. They bother me. I can sit down and read a book for hours, but if you give me a puzzle, it just curdles my blood. I can't explain it. So there are things in this world that are too great for us. And instead of being mad that we can't understand, we can sit back and appreciate them and be humbled by those things. And we worship a God who creates things that are beyond our ability to comprehend. Then he says another thing, three things here, and then four things that are unbearable. Under the earth can't seem to stand up under these. These are things that don't work in the order that God has placed in the earth. So it says like when a fool has a full belly, when someone who doesn't work gets fed. It's like that just in the Bible it says if you want to eat, work. if you want to do these things, go for it. That's how that was back in the day. Or when a slave becomes a master, it's like, well, that's not how things work. And he's noticing all of these things again. It's just there's life principles, there's common ordinary things, and there are life principles to be drawn out of them. It says that there are three things that are exceedingly small but exceedingly wise. This one is very interesting because the animals that are being used, there's a lot. It's not just a cool story about animals, but there's a lot to be found in why the author would choose those animals and things for us to respond to. So it talks about the ant, how the ant is small yet exceedingly wise, and it works hard all summer, so it provides for what it has in the winter. And that's why you don't see a lot of ants around in the winters, because they're underground. And in order to live underground for a year, you have to have food. If you ever seen A Bug's Life, you know this to be true. Duh, come on. These ants are preparing for the future. And one commentator that I was reading says, as these ants prepare for the future, are we even preparing for eternity? Is what we are doing in our lives actually preparing us for what is going to happen in eternity? Or are we so obsessed with the here and now that we act like eternity doesn't exist? And I think that the latter statement is probably more true of us, that we are so obsessed with the here and now that we don't even think about eternity. But situations like this, where we're in the middle of a global pandemic, should cause us a moment of pause and to see there is a lot of death happening. And if there's a lot of death happening, people are concerned with what happens after. And so these are moments where God pauses things so that we can take a look and see that there is more to life than the here and now. There is a great and amazing eternity that is coming. You notice next there's it's called the rock badger, which I remember when I was in high school at TLC, my friends and I thought this verse was hilarious because we didn't know what a rock badger was and why is it in the middle of the Bible. So we named all of our sports teams for all of the tournaments at TLC the Rock Badgers. So I've always had a special place in my heart for the Rock Badgers. But they're Rock Badgers. There's these tiny animals who are just way up in the highest areas of the mountain. It's like, what are you guys doing up there? They're resting in the rock to protect them from hunters. They go way up there so hunters wouldn't get them. And another commentator that I was reading said, and drew our attention to, as they rest in the rock to protect them, are we resting in the rock, the capital R, rock, that is Jesus Christ? Are we resting in him, and are we seeking him for protection? Or are we trying to surround ourselves with all the things of the world for protection instead of resting in the fact that Jesus Christ is our rock? Think of the parable of the wise man builds his house upon the rock. And the foolish man obviously builds his house upon the sand. And I hope all of you said splat like you did in Sunday school, because that's where my brain goes. But we see that these animals teach us to rest in something stronger and greater than us instead of our own abilities. So are we resting in the rock that is Jesus Christ? Is our life built upon the rock instead of the sand? We see he next draws to locusts that have no ruler or captain, but they march in line. Locusts were, man, those things, a couple of them aren't that big of a deal, but if you get a swarm, they would destroy countries. They would sweep through and just destroy anything they got their hands on, especially crops. They would just eat through them and destroy them in any way. Yes, right, splat. But we see that though they have no ruler, individually follow orders as if they are instinctually obeying what they know is to be called of them. So are we people of integrity? Though if you don't have someone slamming you in the face with rules saying, obey this, obey this, obey this, do you seek to still obey? Or are you seeking any opportunity to get away from rules so that you don't have to obey them? Or are we in step with other people, like these locusts are in step with other people for a greater cause? Are we in step with our brothers and sisters in Christ for the greater cause of the gospel, for the greater cause of God's purposes? Then we see the last one. It talks about in some translation it says spider, and some it says lizard, which I know they're like, how do you get those two words mixed up? And in Hebrew, it's called a wall lizard, and so it could be spider or it could be like a gecko that was funky or something like that. But regardless, we see that this spider is always about working. and it threads and it spins a finer thread than any human can and builds masterpieces. If you've ever looked at a spider web, you know that they can put together some really pretty stuff. Even though I hate spiders and I want them all to burn, they still make some amazing things. And this shows us the amazing creative nature that God has created. But it's also a rebuke to lazy people. Are we working hard with the skills that God has given us? Are we utilizing the things that God has given us to further His kingdom? That's what wisdom is. That's the correct application of knowledge that God has given us. We see here that he says there are three things that are stately, and are four things that are stately in their tread. And so again, Agur turns our minds to seeing things that are wonderful, to see these amazing things. These things are wonderful, no doubt, with the boldness, with a man with his army behind him, or a lion cub, or a male goat, which I never understood where the goat came from, but goats are stubborn, so they stick to their guns. They have boldness and pride. All of these things should pale in comparison to the boldness and pride that we have, because we have God on our side. We have the greatest reason to be bold. And then he closes with some general wisdom statements, which make complete sense when you look at them. They're very much wisdom, but they have, again, some deeper applications. It says here, if you have been foolish and you have been caught in doing a bunch of stupid stuff, he said basically just put your hand over your mouth, which is basically just saying if you constantly find yourself getting in trouble, maybe try shutting it for a little bit and thinking before you speak or act. And I love just the wisdom that's in Proverbs. It's like, hey, if you are constantly finding yourselves in troubling situations, maybe it's not the situations, and maybe you just need to take it easy. There's just some serious wisdom to that, where it's like, hey, how about you just put your hand over your mouth, you just slow down, and you stop speaking before you think, or you stop acting before you think, and just take a beat. And then the last one, it talks about if you press milk, it curdles, or if you press a nose, it bleeds. And just like that, anger produces strife. If you press someone who's angry, there's going to be strife. So again, like I've been saying, there's a lot of basic life wisdom in Proverbs. The authors will reference ordinary life circumstances and bring about spiritual reality. So if you punch someone in the nose, it bleeds, right? Like that's pretty common. Like if someone gets jacked in the nose, usually blood comes out. One action produces another. So if someone's angry and you push their buttons, you are sinfully causing strife. If someone's angry and you just go bing, bing, bing. Yeah, I'm the youngest of all the siblings, so I'm a master at, if I find out as a kid something that bothered my siblings, it was game on. Like it's about time to just mess with them. And so that's not right, though. It says here, if you press anger, it produces more strife. And so if you begin to go after someone who's already upset, you are causing more problems. Like, don't do that. If you see someone who's angry, try to help them calm down, as opposed to poking. And that might be funny in the moment, but if they turn around and make your nose bleed, it's not as funny, is it? And so we have to learn to say, if there's someone who's angry, don't press buttons. Don't try to get them going. Don't push their buttons. Seek to help them calm down. Don't press that. If you press the nose, it bleeds. If you press someone who's angry, there's going to be more strife. If you want to avoid the strife, don't press someone who's angry. If you like the strife, correct your own attitudes, because you shouldn't want to make strife. We are called to be peacemakers, like Jesus was a peacemaker. He was the Prince of Peace. So there's Proverbs chapter 30. If you guys ever, for whatever reason, are quizzed on that, now you will have a general breakdown and have knowledge of that chapter. We can see here that there is a ton of wisdom to be found from this. And again, just that practical advice of when you see the way that God has ordered and structured things, God has built nature in wisdom. We see from the beginning of the book of wisdom, in wisdom, God created the heavens and the earth. And so there are many life lessons to be found from just being observant of how life works. And so learn that lesson, but then learn the greater lessons from the book.